In 2004, Tiger Woods was unstoppable. He'd already won 8 majors before turning 29. He'd completed the Tiger Slam, consecutively winning all 4 major championships, something no golfer had ever managed before him. Golf writers weren't debating whether he'd catch Jack Nicklaus's record of 18 majors anymore. They were debating how far past it he'd finish. 22, 25. The number kept climbing because nobody could find a reason it wouldn't. And then, in the middle of all that certainty, a book came out that said Tiger wouldn't get there at all, not because his talent would fade, not because someone else would simply play better, but for a completely different reason, something so specific that once you hear how it actually played out, it's hard to call it a lucky guess. That prediction came from Johnny Miller, and by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how close he got, down to the specific part of Tiger's body that eventually gave out. Miller's case wasn't that Tiger would lose his swing or his nerve. It rested on 2 specific ideas, and neither one was about talent running out. The first was physical. Miller pointed to the modern power swing Tiger, and a handful of his peers had adopted. It was built on serious gym work and a much more violent rotation through the ball. He argued it put enormous strain on the lower back over time. He didn't just say injury in vague terms the way most cautionary predictions do. He named the exact spot. A bad L5 vertebra, he wrote, was the kind of physical problem that could change everything for Tiger. At a time when Tiger's only real injury history was a knee issue, singling out a specific vertebra in the lower back wasn't a safe, hedged prediction. It was oddly precise for something that hadn't shown any signs of becoming a problem yet. The second part had nothing to do with golf swings at all. Miller suggested that trouble in Tiger's personal life, specifically around his family, could derail him just as easily as any injury. At the time, both ideas seemed far-fetched. Tiger's body, as far as the public could see, was fine. His marriage hadn't even happened yet. Just months after Miller's book hit shelves, Tiger married Elin Nordegren in a lavish ceremony in Barbados, about as far from a warning sign as a marriage could look to the outside world. For a few years, Miller's prediction just sat there, mostly forgotten, filed away as one more hot take from golf's loosest cannon. Nobody was bringing up a book chapter about Tiger's back or his home life while he was busy adding majors at a record pace. But that wasn't how the story stayed. Both halves of his prediction eventually caught up with Tiger, and they didn't arrive quietly. To understand how bold this prediction really was, you have to remember where Tiger stood in 2003 and 2004. He'd led the PGA Tour in wins 5 years in a row. At 24, he'd become the youngest player in history to complete the career Grand Slam. He was winning at a rate no one in the modern game had come close to, and doing it with a level of dominance that made his rivals look like they were playing a different tournament that week. Jack Nicklaus's 18 majors had stood for decades as the sport's single most untouchable number, the one record everyone agreed defined greatness in golf. Tiger, barely into his late 20s, was ahead of Nicklaus's own pace at the same age. He had both time and talent on his side. Betting against him wasn't just a bold take in 2004, it was a bad one. That's the exact moment Johnny Miller decided to put this prediction in print. And the timing is what makes it worth telling. He wasn't reacting to trouble in Tiger's life that had already started. He wrote it down before any of it had happened, when Tiger was still in his prime. In November 2009, the first half of Miller's warning arrived all at once. A late-night car accident outside Tiger's Florida home set off a chain of revelations about infidelity that dominated headlines for months, not just in golf media but everywhere. Tiger admitted to it publicly, stepped away from the game for an extended stretch, and by August 2010, he and Elin were divorced. Sponsors distanced themselves from him too. The image that had made him the most marketable athlete on the planet took a hit it never fully recovered from. At that point, Tiger was sitting on 14 majors, 4 behind Nicklaus, and still only 32 years old. On paper, closing that gap looked like a matter of time, maybe 2 or 3 more good seasons. Instead, he wouldn't win another major for 11 years. The personal turmoil Miller had flagged as a possible threat back in 2004 wasn't theoretical anymore. It had already cost Tiger the one resource everyone assumed he had plenty of: time. While that story played out in public, the other half of Miller's warning was building quietly in Tiger's lower back. Knee surgeries had already slowed him by the late 2000s, but starting around 2014, back problems took over. Tiger described suffering spasms and sciatica that made it difficult just to get out of bed some mornings, let alone swing a club at tour speed. 3 separate microdiscectomies followed between 2014 and 2016, and none of them fully solved the pain. By early 2017, his back had deteriorated to the point that he needed a spinal fusion, a far more serious operation that permanently locks 2 vertebrae together and, in most cases, is treated as a last resort after everything else has failed. Here's the detail that turns this from a rough coincidence into something genuinely eerie. The fusion removed the damaged disc between Tiger's 5th lumbar vertebra and his sacrum, the same joint known in medical terms as L5S1. That is the exact vertebra Johnny Miller had named, by number, 13 years earlier, as the injury that could take everything away from Tiger. That's not a vague prediction. That's a specific medical detail, written down years before the injury occurred, matching the actual surgery almost exactly. And it wasn't the last back surgery Tiger would need. Over the years that followed, he'd go back under the knife again as the levels above that original fusion took on extra strain, a well-documented pattern in spine surgery, where fusing one joint puts more pressure on the ones next to it. In other words, the physical toll Miller warned about in 2004 didn't resolve itself in 2017. It kept compounding. Miller wasn't some outside commentator with nothing on the line. He'd won 2 majors himself, including a final round 63 at the 1973 U.S. Open at Oakmont, still remembered as one of the greatest rounds in major championship history. By the 2000s, he was NBC's lead golf analyst and the most polarizing voice in the booth, mostly because he said things other commentators wouldn't. He'd criticize a player's swing or nerve on live television when everyone else in the industry chose to use a safer, softer language. Players didn't always like him for it, but nobody accused him of not knowing what he was doing. In 2004, some of those unfiltered opinions ended up in a book called I Call the Shots. Most of it was written in 2003, while Tiger was in the middle of leading the tour in victories for the 5th straight year. Buried inside was a chapter with a blunt title, Can Tiger Catch Jack? The case for an emphatic no. Tiger's return from that fusion produced one of the most emotional moments in golf history, the 2019 Masters, his 5th green jacket and 15th major, won at 43 years old after most of the sport had already written the ending to his story. Less than 2 years after a surgery that fused part of his spine together, he walked up the 18th hole at Augusta with the lead. It's remembered, fairly, as one of the great comebacks in sports, but even that couldn't close the gap Miller had predicted 15 years earlier. 15 majors meant Tiger still needed 3 more just to tie Nicklaus, let alone pass him. And at 43, coming off a fused spine, 3 more majors was never a realistic target. No matter how good that 1 week at Augusta felt, he never got close. More injuries followed, including a serious car accident in 2021 that nearly ended his career for good, and the major count stayed frozen at 15. So the final math looks like this: 15 majors for Tiger, 18 for Nicklaus. 3 short, for almost exactly the two reasons a golf analyst wrote down in a book back in 2004, at a time when doubting Tiger Woods sounded less like analysis and more like an insult. Johnny Miller wasn't hoping Tiger would fail, and he wasn't just throwing out a number to be provocative. He was looking at a swing built for power over longevity, and a life that was still years away from the kind of pressure that would eventually crack it. Neither one had shown up yet in 2004. But both showed up eventually, in almost exactly the order and the shape he described. That's why, decades later, that old chapter title doesn't read like an insult anymore. It reads like the most accurate prediction golf never wanted to believe.